everyone. I miss all of you. This is Miss Man, and today we're going to be talking about instrument families. Last week we talked about categorizing different percussion instruments, and this week we're going to be talking about all the instruments. So, I'm going to start with the instruments of the orchestra, and I'm on Music Play right now, so you can always hop on Music Play too and do the same thing. So I'm going to click over here on Instruments of the Orchestra, and this is an introduction to the instruments of the orchestra. I have more than just the instruments of the orchestra, and we'll be talking about that too. So this is an overview. I'm going to start with the introduction. And an orchestra is a large group of musicians that perform together. That's what an orchestra is. And this is what they look like when they're seated in the orchestra. We have the strings up at the front. Then we have the woodwinds. Then we have the brass. And then the percussion at the back. And so there are 4 different instrument families. The first one is the strings. And this is what the strings sound like. And the woodwinds, they're in the middle. We're going to listen to the woodwinds now. And now the brass, and the brass are located closer to the back. And here's what they look like, and we're going to listen to the brass. And moving on to the percussion family. We talked about percussion instruments last week. Those are the things like the triangle, the tambourine, the drums. Those are all percussion instruments that we looked at. And now we're going to listen to the percussion instruments. Instrument families. The instruments are grouped together in families because they are made of similar materials, they look similar to each other, and they produce sounds in the same way. The conductor of the orchestra is a person who directs the orchestra. They indicate the tempo, which is the speed of the sound, the dynamics, the loudness, or the quietness of the sound, and the style, and that could be like the contour of the sound. They use a baton when they're directing the group. The difference between bands and orchestras, you've probably seen bands like high school bands, and then orchestras, is that orchestras have stringed instruments, and we're going to be talking about the stringed instruments. Bands do not have stringed instruments. And the string family. So these are just 4 of them. I'm going to be showing you 2 more that I have. The violin. The violin is the highest of the string family. And then the viola, the second highest. You do hold it right here, same as the violin. You hold the violin, hold the violin up here. Now this one's the cello. The cello you place on the ground, and you hold it in front of you. And then the double bass, that's the really big one. Sometimes you'll also see this one in like small jazz bands or something like that. I love the double bass. Awesome. And before moving on, I have 3 stringed instruments to show you. The first one, which is one of the ones we looked at, which is the violin. You place the violin under your neck. You should be able to hold it. And then you have the bow, which is what you use to bow the strings. You can also pluck the strings. Also, another name for a violin is a fiddle. A fiddle is the same thing as a violin, and you can hear fiddles in bluegrass music, you can hear them in country music, and violins are used for the orchestra. Or if you're a violin group like Lindsey Sterling or Black Violin, those are pretty cool violin groups or violin artists. The next one I have, which is not an orchestra instrument, is our favorite, the ukulele. Some of you are in my ukulele group, and this one's one of my favorite stringed instruments. The next stringed instrument I have, which everybody's familiar with this one, is the guitar. The guitar. And now moving on, those are the stringed instruments. Some of them are not part of the orchestra. The guitar is typically not part of the orchestra unless it's a featured instrument. Ukuleles, not typically found in the orchestra. But the ones on the screen are violin, viola, cello, double bass are typically found in the orchestra. And another member of the string family is the harp. And the harp sounds like this. It's so pretty. I have personally never got to play the harp. I wish I could. It's one of my favorite string instruments. I love the string instruments. And moving on, woodwind family. We have the flute. And then we have the oboe. Then we have the clarinet. And then we have this really big one called the bassoon. And before moving on, I have 2 woodwind instruments to show you. I have a flute. You hold the flute out to the side. You put the bottom of your chin resting on the flute. You don't put your lips on the flute. And you press down on the buttons. And this flute is broken, so I'm just showing you what it looks like, and I'll try and make a sound. It still makes a sound, but because it needs fixing, it's not going to play right. But this is the flute, and this is what the flute looks like. The next one I have is the clarinet. This one does work, and the clarinet's pretty cool. it has what's called a reed on it, and the reed vibrates, and that's what makes the sound. And you put your mouth on the top. If you recognize that song, you get 5 extra points. I don't know what the points go to, but those are the woodwind instruments. Next, we're moving on. I don't know why those keep popping up. Another member of the woodwind family is the saxophone. We have the alto saxophone. And we have the tenor saxophone. It's a little bit bigger than the alto saxophone. I wish I had a saxophone. They're one of my favorite instruments. Coach Hicks has a saxophone. If Coach Hicks ever wants to show her saxophone to everybody, just let me know and I can request that. She can also play the saxophone. I wish I could play the saxophone, but I cannot, and I do not own a saxophone. Moving on to the brass family. We have the trumpet. We have the French horn. We have the trombone. Oh! 5 points if you recognize that song. And we have the tuba. While that's playing, I'm going to get my brass instrument. I have the trumpet. So this is what the trumpet looks like. You hold it up like this. You push down on the buttons. And that's the trumpet. The next one I have is this one's a lot bigger. It will knock over everything. The trombone. And it's really big. It's really long. It goes from here all the way down to here. Let's see if I back up some. Maybe you can see the whole thing. The trombone. And moving on to our next instrument. We have the percussion family, and I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly because I only have 1 more minute left of video. We have the triangle. We have the snare drum. We have the bass drum. We have the timpani. We have the cymbals. We have the xylophone. And the chimes. And moving on. Keyboards. Keyboards can be considered percussion instruments because they have keys that strike that make sound. Piano. Celesta. Sorry, I'm going kind of fast. I have 10 seconds left. And the harpsichord. And electronic keyboards.